Lord, I thank you for sunshine, thank you for rain, thank you for joy, thank you for pain. It's a beautiful day, it's a beautiful day. Lord, I thank you for sunshine, thank you for rain, thank you for joy, thank you for pain. It's a beautiful day, it's a beautiful day. I don't wanna act so high and mighty, 'cause tomorrow I will fall down on my face. Lord, I thank you for sunshine, thank you for rain, thank you for joy, thank you for pain. It's a beautiful day, it's a beautiful day. I don't wanna act so high and mighty, 'cause tomorrow I may fall down on my face. I don't wanna act so high and mighty, 'cause tomorrow I may fall down on my face. Lord, I thank you for sunshine. I don't wanna act so high and mighty, 'cause tomorrow I may fall down on my face. Lord, I thank you for sunshine, thank you for rain, thank you for joy, thank you for pain. It's a beautiful day, it's a beautiful day. I don't wanna act so high and mighty, 'cause tomorrow I may fall down on my face. Lord, I thank you for sunshine, thank you for rain, thank you for joy, thank you for pain. It's a beautiful day, it's a beautiful day.
Greetings and welcome to the Friday Morning Nameless. I'd like to invite you to save the date for an estuary-inspired event. Music, food, discussion, speakers, and fellowship. Midwestuary 2025, the Fellowship of the Spirit, Chicago, Illinois, August 22nd through the 24th of 2025. Visit and bookmark midwestuary.com for future details and updates. Stay tuned for the event that we know you won't want to miss. Thank you for your time and attention.
Greetings, welcome to the Friday Morning Nameless. I'm Chad the Alcoholic. This is Jordan and I were talking a little bit right before I pressed record about, I said, well, unfortunately I have to put on this silly mask, and he says, what would happen if you put on a different one? Or I can't remember exactly how you phrased that, but I thought I would, well, let's try this one. This is old. This is also known as Chad the Lobster Monkey Mask. So,
okay.
Yeah. So, and I have like a whole silly get up with it, like this whole lobster stuff. My wife gets me these things. She got me this one because she's just so she's so in tune with me, you know, and like even though she thinks this stuff is ridiculous and like all this internet stuff is like she wants really nothing to do with it. Not nothing, but has no interest in it, and she's like really cognitively sharp, all this stuff. She probably runs circles around many of us in the corner, but she's just like, whatever, you go have fun with your friends, and that's good for you. And you know, so it's interesting that
this is a giant model train set, brother. It really
is. This little train set, I love it. This is so cool. Well, I want to thank you for for coming on and all of the different conversations that we've had and the exchanges that we've had. I want to express my gratitude to you um, for being so gracious. And I don't know exactly why you've decided to be so gracious, but I do want to extend a bit of gratitude to you, not only from me personally, but from anybody else. Because I know, I mean, it's like the old model of, oh, I can't talk to that guy because he's somebody or whatever, and then you say, well, I'm you just say, yeah, okay, I'll pray about it, and then you end up talking with us, and that's really cool because I think it's kind of um, it's kind of breaking the old lines, the old paradigm of like of what we think about what hierarchy is and status and things like that. So kind of cool. Like I tried to reach out to this dude, this he's like this young dude. He's like 25. He just makes these walking talking videos where he walks around his neighborhood and just shares his thoughts and I and it's interesting listening to this kid share his thoughts, and people are really drawn to him. I reached out to him because I wanted to do like a randos with him, and he still might, but his email is like stacked now,
Yeah,
and I don't know if you will or not, but
you should pray on it.
yeah, no, that's true. That's true. Because like I'm not a YouTuber, I'm a tile setter who happens to be in a YouTube fellowship. Who we're not really YouTubers, really. I wouldn't say, except that we're on YouTube. So whatever.
Wow. Well, I'm old enough to remember uh, the skateboard dog and the Chinese guys who were lip syncing, like literally the first whatever 100 YouTube videos. So my sense of being a YouTuber is in fact the set of people who are on YouTube, and I don't have any. Well, it's actually twice. I don't have any particular sort of personal relationship with a class of people who emerged probably around 2013, 2014 when YouTube became a big thing, became famous on YouTube. So that the idea that of a YouTuber is a particular caste. And I also have a sense of deep distaste for that. So I kind of personally reject that as a category that I'm willing to give any value to. But there's something just came up. And I know that's not on topic, but I don't think that's our gig anyway. I think it's reasonable. Is it reasonable? I would strongly assert, so stronger than reasonable, that we have two distinct attention-giving dynamics that are struggling with each other. One is profound bullshit. It's interesting. I even wrote about this very long ago in that Blue Church essay, which has to do with just because human beings unconsciously give attention to people who other people give attention to. This gives rise to a very easy hack, which is if you can concentrate enough attention on somebody, then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. They become famous just because they're famous.
Mm-hmm.
And minimum viable degree of salience landscape hijacking that gets you to that hack, then puts you into a class of this sort of terrible combination of having attention because you're famous and having the original attention because you're good at hacking other people's neurology, which is profound bullshit. And just as a little piece, and it connects with the profound bullshit that emerged in television. So we're now 80, 100 years into that. And I don't think that the selection function leads one to conclude that virtually nobody who has that attention properly deserves that attention. Meaning that in a healthy relevance realization sensibility, almost none of those people would have any attention. This is that separation between salience and relevance. And then we have the relevance realization side, which is, okay, well, who is worthy of proper attention? How do we reestablish the right channels so that we're paying attention to the people who have accumulated relevant competence, relevant wisdom, relevant humility, so that our attention is being well used? And it's, as far as I can tell, orthogonal. Like, you can't use anything in the first set to tell you anything about the second set. The first set is profound bullshit, so should be very scrupulously avoided all the way down to the lowest levels. And, I have had on occasion invitations to participate in the universe of bullshit, and have just said, no, thank you, because it's actually a very sticky place to go. Like, once you step into that stream, you're kind of, what would you call it, covered in bullshit, and it's difficult to not be covered in bullshit once you have. And so, this methodology, and it really is just actually the methodology of praying on it, has helped me be able to just notice, say, okay, Chad, who I don't know, has sent me an invitation, and I'm not going to try to figure it out. I'm not going to try to do like a strategy or, see, is this going to increase my visibility or my legibility or my influence, or the opposite, right? Is this going to taint me in some way that's going to cause the category 1 bullshit to not like me? It's more of a, all right, well, I'm sort of all in on the God thing, so I'm just going to pray. And that's actually really valuable, because then I get simultaneously a different approach to where do I give my time and attention. And I get to learn more about how to be in relationship with God and how to discern what actually is the thing that God wants me to do, which is vastly more valuable. If you believe that's valuable at all, it's sort of infinitely more valuable. So that just kind of came up in response to what you were just saying.
Oh, it's really great. Here, I'm going to switch, because for some reason my phone, ever since I went on this, I went on this Canadian stream, these dudes, and ever since then my phone's been clicking. I don't I don't know what that means. So I want to just switch over to my laptop here, because please just remove that.
Sorry. Whoa.
You know what that was? That was the special effects from like a 1970s TV science fiction show. You were probably just either flying off in a little paper mache spaceship, or shooting one of those little aluminum wrapped foam guns, which maps totally to your mask. So I get it. The aesthetics fit.
This is ridiculous. Sorry. Let me shut this off. I'm sorry, Jordan. This is prime YouTube, my friends. Yeah. We're back. Okay. Sorry. Can you hear me now?
Totally. Yeah.
Okay. That was ridiculous. And prime YouTube. There you have it. Sorry. Yeah, that's the phone. I don't know. It just doesn't really work well sometimes. So, but the laptop also doesn't work well sometimes with the Wi-Fi in the house. So I don't know. Trade-offs.
Trust me, I understand.
Okay. So you brought up the Blue Church thing. Now, did you coin the Blue Church? Is that
No, I didn't actually. Somebody on Twitter who's completely anonymous and has never come back to capture it may never run across the fact that I cribbed it. So I wrote an essay on situational assessment 2017. I think that was all in probably February of 2017. And in it, I quoted a passage from Reddit, where somebody talked about the blue church and the red religion, which made sense to me, but I hadn't really delved into it. It just made intuitive sense. This is a really nice juxtaposition. And then some people asked me, well, what does that mean? So I went and sort of meditated on it and wrote the Blue Church essay. So I kind of stole it.
Yeah, no, it's good. I think it's interesting, because I think that's a lot of how the conversations that I have in the way that this little corner of the internet, whatever that is kind of emerged, or whatever, however you want to say that. It has to do with kind of like the recession of the Blue Church, and it's all very intentional. And it kind of reminds me of it's interesting, because before I got on with you, I did some prayer stuff, because I hadn't gotten to my prayer stuff this morning, and then I'm like, like I called you on this call because I wanted to talk about practice and prayer and family, and
and so I'm like, I got to do this. So I did my prayer. I've been working with the rosary. My friend Neal, when he came to visit me, he gave me this rosary, and he said, this is blessed by the Pope Francis. And I said, oh, that's interesting. Okay. And then it just sat over there for a couple of weeks, and then I was getting an intuition that I should be praying with it. And so I tried to pray with it, and I didn't know anything about like the practice of the rosary or how to do it, but I had a book that I got. My wife's uncle passed away, and we got a bunch of books from him, and one of them was the rosary, or how to pray the rosary. So I started doing that, and my attention is so, like, as a classroom student, I'm so terrible, and so reading is really a difficult medium for me to stay connected to. So I would just do a little here and a little there, and then I wouldn't do it at all. And one day I was on the phone with my friend Luke, who's from the corner, and we were talking, and I was driving from one job to the next at my tile job, and he says, isn't the timing of God so strange? And as soon as he said that, this big dump truck pulls alongside my vehicle, and on the side of the dump truck is like this big 3-foot image of Mary, and she says, pray the rosary. I'm like, yeah, okay. And so, like, it's interesting how God communicates. And then so he pulled forward, and we're in like a little traffic situation, and on the back of his truck he had the same big sticker. It was like this double reminder, pray the rosary. I'm like, oh man. So then I started to do that as a practice, and right around that time I was secretly, my wife had found out that we were pregnant, or that she's pregnant, and that was keeping it on the down low, because you're not supposed to tell people until a certain number of weeks or whatever, even though I told a couple handfuls of friends. And for some reason I was connecting that prayer, the rosary prayer, to the advent of our child. And it's very powerful, because, like, if I look at myself and I look at how I've thought about women, but let's say my lack of reverence. There has been a lack of reverence, if I'm going to be 100% honest, because it's not that I had disrespect for them, but I didn't have the kind of respect that I would want for my daughter. I would want men to have for my daughter. And so I haven't had that. So that was a real connection to, you're going to have to buckle down and do this rosary. I don't care if you like it or not. Do this, because this is going to be good. So I did my rosary this morning right before we got on, and I look up and I have this, like, my house is, all of this is strange, Jordan. Like, I have a house, like I shouldn't have a house, because, like, I'm a homeless alcoholic who ends up getting sober in AA, and I eventually come to own a home, which is ridiculous. And I have a wife, which is also ridiculous. And there's a child on the way, and all this is, and I'm married, and all this is so unlikely. And so I'm looking up at this in our home. Everything about this is so bizarre to me. And I'm looking at this. I got these old VHS tapes that I've purchased from, like, I like to go to, like, antique stores and thrift stores, because I think they're just some of the coolest museums in the world. Even though I don't really buy stuff there much, but they're interesting. So, but I like old VHS, because I grew up on VHS, and I grew up on television. That was the only Shabbat that I had, was television, and I'm thinking about all of these titles and all of these actors, and all, like, thinking about all of that is very strange to me. And then you bringing this up, and immediately I'm connecting it to Wayne's World.
Okay.
Wayne's World is like what we're living in. What we're doing right now on this online thing is very much like the idea of Wayne's World. Wayne and Garth would have,
Public access television. Yeah.
yeah, they would have loved this. This is their thing, you know.
Yeah, this is definitely that lineage. Yeah, you're right. Totally.
And it's interesting that we have an opportunity to play with this tool and to be genuine with it or not. And I think that just this small, very small relationship that we do share is very cool between just you and I. And we haven't had a lot, but I've had people ask me, why are you reaching back out to Jordan? Like, what's the deal with that? Are you trying to like be this big huge? I'm like, no, I think he's a very interesting dude who's had a cool perspective, a very different perspective than mine, and somebody who I think has many intuitions about a lot of these things. So it's interesting. It's interesting that I get to talk with you about this, and you've had a very real experience, not only with your coming into faith, but like how bizarre is it that your kind of unveiling of being a Christian and then coming to where you're at right now, where you've had this disaster happen in your hometown and stuff like this, and having an opportunity to be a representative of Christ in your town under such a distressing moment is very interesting to me. And
yeah,
it seems unlikely too, because it's like why would a hurricane hit your town? It's just so bizarre.
not supposed to.
Right.
Yeah, and the languaging that seems to be settling is the 1,000-year flood. So it was a to kind of differentiate it from growing up in Texas, we had hurricanes somewhat routinely, and they were kind of like something, but not that big a deal. But this was a 1,000-year flood. I mean, it was bizarre how intense and significant and damaging it is still. Yeah, it's been. Maybe, I mean, the thing that's coming up is something. Okay, yeah. So the people in my community with whom I've had a relationship with in the context of being a Christian are pretty much the people who go to my church, and then maybe a handful more. So most of my neighbors who I'm friends with as a neighbor, we're just friends as neighbors. But because my activity with my church has been so central, basically it's all I've been doing for the past 3 weeks. This now, the fact that I'm part of this church and this church has this activity, I've been finding myself telling stories. So a lot of my neighbors haven't been engaging in that level of activity. But they're very interested to find out what's going on. So I'm telling stories, and that will cause them to like bridge over and ask me questions about my faith, which is actually quite surprising because I don't really feel. I mean, outside of these internet conversations, it doesn't seem to me like I have anything particularly interesting to say on that front. Like, why would I be telling somebody here? But if anybody's curious, so yes, it has had an interesting shift in the nature of my relationship to my community, and in particular to the folks in the kind of the broader neighborhood.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I mean, I'm sure it's got to be a very interesting experience for them to hear just stories of Christians that are converted Christians, because my experience with being in the church, so the church I attend is like 180 years old, and it's in a very small farming community. The building will turn 100 this year, but the church itself is 100. The congregation is 180 years old, which is quite old, I think, for an American church. And in Wisconsin, so it's older than the state. It's a Lutheran church, which I'm not like I'll consider that as okay, fine, but like I consider myself more of a follower of Christ than a Lutheran, let's say. There's things about Luther I'm not really all that jazzed about, and I really don't. it's not that big of a deal to me. But so what is interesting to me though is being in this church is it's very like it has an older liturgy, so it's pretty close to kind of close to what the Catholics do, which my wife had a big hand in choosing the church that we attend because she grew up Catholic, so she likes the liturgy. She doesn't like the skinny jeans and the smoke machines and all that stuff, and I'm not really fond of that either. But she, so we decided to go with this one, and I love it because, and I've talked to a couple of my other friends who are kind of, Christian curious. They're more interested in the band and the smoke machine stuff. They think that this other thing that I'm like the church I'm a part of it's too slow and the sermons are always the same. It's like, yeah, but that's why I like it. I like going there and knowing that there's a liturgy that I get to stand and sit, and I get to stand and sing songs I don't know, but learn them from most of my congregation there's like 200 people there. Most of them are like 70 years old and older. There are some younger families, but only a handful of us, because that's kind of a norm, I think. In general, like there aren't a lot of families right now, or historic in comparison to historical settings. Like the people that I'm going to church with, they were born there, they were baptized there, they got married there, they had their confirmation there, they're gonna die there, their kids were raised there. So like it's interesting talking with them and sharing. They like we were doing we were watching The Chosen a few months ago and talking about it, and it was interesting because they didn't even have any experience with watching long form television. So like The Chosen to them was like, I don't understand. It's hard to follow. It was interesting, but then they want to know about like my actual conversion, and I'll tell them that story, and they're just like, that's so fascinating. I kind of wish that I had such an experience as yours. And I'm like, no, you don't. I wish I had the experience that you do, where you could just your whole life you've been able to see it and be in it, and you haven't had to wrestle with those different things. But then I think about, but that's like the glory of God is like it's not a Big Mac,
Yeah, well, and there's also the notion of counterfactual is actually an illusion. There's no notion of it actually having been otherwise. Like you can't wish the alternative because yours is yours, and it actually is specifically yours. And what happens is we try to substitute our ability to fantasize for our ability to be in relationship with reality. So, I mean, I get why we would do that, because at any given point in time, like I'm faced with a particular choice, and that choice isn't in fact before me. And then I can imagine a timeline where I had taken the alternative choice, right? That's just part of our basic faculties. And so therefore what I can do is I can kind of go backwards and now notice what's happening there. It's a double imagination. I'm now imagining myself being far in the past, and then imagining that self making a different choice and imagining a timeline. But that counterfactual thing is not actually real. It's not that wasn't a real possibility.
Right.
So yeah, I get it, but it's somewhat increasingly as I spend time, it's a silly distraction, because the key is actually to be deeply immersed in your life as it actually is, and not worry very much about what could have been, because that's
well, and there's like an unbeing about that, I think.
Yeah, there you go. That's a good way of putting it. Exactly.
Like I was talking with my friend Luke, and we were, because it's often these kinds of this thread of thinking, like kind of like the easy or like the quick quip thing to say would be like, like, well, what if Hitler was never born or something like that? It's like, no, if Hitler was never born, we would not have the band Rush. So let's like it's a ridiculous thing to think and say, but at the same time, it's like, no, it's not ridiculous, because that's the beauty and mystery of at least my experience with God is like we could say, well, it's a really terrible thing that you're an alcoholic, Chad. And it's like, no, it's not. It's been one of the greatest gifts. It's like God would use the power of alcohol to bring me crawling to him. And he knew that that would be the thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's heavy. You can say, yeah, it's very heavy. But the word terrible doesn't really have any sense to it in this context. Exactly.
Mhm.
It's
Yeah.
like, look, it's the spin I got. And you got your own spin, and your spin's got its own weirdness. And it might be, in fact, that, as you say, like it's what brought me, and I needed to come crawling. And that come crawling allowed me to go into a deeper quality and hold something, which, by the way, is now a cross that I'm bearing, which is the thing that I can now hold is actually the thing that I'm here to give. And that's, the richness of the meaning. And that richness doesn't necessarily mean sort of saccharine. It means, complex. Yeah, I think this is a fundamental. I don't feel like right now we're hitting it at a deep enough level to make it clear, but we're both on the right spot, which is something like, you said it right, like it's an unbeing. There's a thing that happens. Basically, it's like disassociation psychologically. Like we disassociate ourselves from the reality of our immersed lives. We then imagine that by virtue of imagination, by virtue of fantasy, we can somehow live in an alternative reality of our own fabrication. But all of that's off. The right thing to do is actually reconnect, religio, and come back into full immersion in our actual reality. And therefore, these kinds of questions, you discover that they're actually just a distraction. That's the point. They're just a distraction. Not that different than watching, what was the show you were watching? For me, you're watching Wayne's World. I was watching The Love Boat in that narrative until you snap into Wayne's World, because that's obviously a lot more relevant. But yeah, it's like that. Are you immersed in a fantasy, and then your real life is somehow weirdly subordinate and almost inverted and judged on the basis of the fantastical? Or you're just living in your real life, in which case the fantastical has some sort of sometimes relevant functional value. Should I touch the red hot poker? Let me imagine what that would be like. Oh, that would be very hot and would hurt. So then no, right? But that's that, right? You don't spend a lot of time carrying imaginal states of what could have been otherwise behind you, because you've already moved past that moment. And what's relevant is what's happening in the next moment that you're entering into.
Well, yeah, and even if you could carry them, you wouldn't prolong, because, like, so I'll on Sundays, a buddy of mine and we go into detox, and we share. We try to carry a message to folks there who are potentially looking for an answer to their problem. And oftentimes you'll hear even people with long-term sobriety, they'll say something like, if I can just remember how bad it was, I won't go back. And it's like, that's not how people work. You can't remember how bad it was the last time you stubbed your toe. I mean, you can remember that it wasn't good.
You can remember that it was bad, like the category of bad. You can remember that, but you are not experiencing the quality of the badness in any way.
No, and especially like, and like let's say the quality of temptation is powerful, is far more powerful than the quality of remembering the bad sometimes. Because like especially if you're disconnected from the Father, if you're disconnected from the ultimate power source, like the one that the Creator, and you're doing that, if you're kind of wandering in the wilderness for long enough, all it takes is a little temptation, and there's a lot of power in temptation.
I think the line is actually very clean. It's the adversary is better than you in everything that you could possibly hope to do. So if you imagine for an instant that under your own understanding, under your own wisdom, under your own power, you can actually outwit or outwill the adversary, you're definitely under his influence. It is only by virtue of being completely supported by the Father that you have any chance at all.
Yeah. Yeah, that's powerful. And yeah, I mean, it's that's why it takes, I think it's taken, paying it, like the more little practices I get to do, it started with, a sponsor saying, okay, I'd like you to hit your knees every morning and say thank you. And then when you go to bed, or, in the morning, say, please help me stay sober. And then when you go to bed, say, thank you for keeping me sober. And it's like,
Yeah.
why do I do that? I don't care why you would do that. Just do it. You asked for my help. I'm a mediator. So,
like, Chad, that's not how this game works. That's not
right.
Do what I told you.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like, well, I don't like being boss wrong. Yeah, nobody does. Don't worry about it. Nobody likes being boss wrong.
That's great. I love that.
And so then you just do it. And then what happens is the more you do it, the more you discover like little things that could crop up that you could use. And like, I like, let's see, 12 years ago, I wouldn't have, if you would have asked me if you're going to be a Christian, one of those people, no way, dude, no way. And like the way that I was captured by Christ was completely out of my hands. And also it was also a result of little seeds along the way, or little bits of being pulled along the way, little by little. And it's as if God knows exactly the right amount of pull and push that we need, and He'll allow us to just hit. You want to hit the wall. You don't want to say please and thank you. Okay, go hit the wall. Go ahead, it's fine. And like that's what brought me in, and then I ended up a member of a church and on like on the board and all this weird stuff, and I don't know how to make of it, man. And it's great. And I was talking to a friend of mine who has been sober for like almost 30 years, and he was raised in like a Christian setting that he thought it wasn't good for him. And so then he ended up making his way out of the church and into AA. And then eventually when he had kids, he ended up making his way back into a church, but merely as a servant, not really as a church. He didn't like the religious structures,
merely as a disciple.
Yes, right. And so he always would look at this as like, I'm here to serve, and which is fine. But I was talking with him recently about this, and he's like, today he says, well, what does it mean to be a Christian? And he said that he thought that to be a follower of Christ is what it means to be a Christian. And then he's like, and then he said, and that being the case, then why do we need the church? And I'm like, why do we need the church? Like, of course we need the church. Of course we're going to need a church, because like you can't just have, I'm going to be a follower of Christ and carry that torch. Like, what about the guy like myself who, like, if the church wasn't there, I would still be wandering in the wilderness, I guess. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, these structures have their issues, but man, it's like the further away we get from the structures, the more society at large seems to have its crumblings,
Yeah,
and so
that's a perfectly valid noticing. You can do it micro level too.
Yeah.
If you like what happened, you get like what I was thinking about is like what happens if you imagine yourself being sort of a church unto yourself. So not just a priesthood of all believers, but just you, like just by yourself. You and Jesus and the Holy Spirit and the Father. I'm just going to go ahead and guess. I mean, unless you happen to be actually Jesus, which you're not, you're probably going to fuck that up.
Oh,
that's just kind of the point is that, and you'll happen is that at some point, some simulation of God will interpose itself, in idolatry. Something will interpose itself between you and God, and then you'll just sort of find yourself relating to that, and which of course has the consequence of bringing you further and further away, and you're just off. Right? We the critique of the more liturgical branches, the Orthos and the Catholics of the Protestants, is perfectly reasonable. Like it is the case that there's a groundingness that as you get further from that groundingness, there's a reason why there's whatever end denominations of Protestantism. And if you kind of push your way all the way to the edge and say, well, I'm going to be a church of one, then what that means is that the likelihood that you're actually going to be able to maintain continuity of contact with the Trinity just goes down tremendously. Oh, well, okay. And that is the church. The church is the people that are all collectively endeavoring, and in the context of the Spirit and each other, right? Two or more and I, then you have some real possibility of being like, well, Chad, as I hear you, it sounds like child sacrifice is probably not actually discipleship. It just feels way off. You're like, fuck, dude, how did I get off on that track? Huh. Like, let's bring it back in. let's see if we can kind of work on this thing. Here's these things right here, like, love God with all your heart and love your neighbor. Those seem like pretty solid. And what does that feel like and work like? Let's demonstrate. And by the way, not talk about it a lot. Like the talking about it in church is neat, but the actual practicing of it out in the world and noticing how confusing and weird and hard it is, and then sharing testimony with each other. Like, here's the thing that happened in my world, and here's how my life did it. Not because you should be like me, but rather something in that may have a lesson for you in the direction you're going. Like, that's how it's wired up. So I think it's actually, by the way, just as a bit of a branch, I think we're in a really interesting moment with regard to this question of the church. You can kind of make a top-down notice that the church has gone through transformations, gone through a few, right? At least two big ones, and you can kind of make that smaller if you'd like. And I don't suspect. I mean, I suppose you could argue that was just all a mistake, a human-driven error. But you could also say, well, maybe there's something going on there that has a deeper meaning to it. And of course, back to our previous story, trying to retcon back to, well, if we just hadn't had a schism, then we'd all be good. Like, no, that's trying to pretend like that's how reality works. That's not. That happened, and it happened at a particular moment in a particular way. And it's better to say, where are we now? What is that? How do we respond to the reality we're in? And this conversation, right, this internet thing, is completely novel, right, in the history of all reality. And there's something about the way the church must, by necessity, embody herself in the context of this new possibility that will be different in some meaningful way. Mm-hmm. And what that new meaningful way is may in fact be quite profound, like as significant or more significant than the previous two major moves. And what's fascinating about it is that the only way we're going to find out is actually just by living it, right? Just living it with each other and noticing, like, okay, how do we do this disciple thing in communion and in reverence. I love you bringing that back, by the way. Okay, I love this notion of, like, it's not about disrespecting women and respecting women. It's actually about reverence. It's over here. And if you're not here, then the other place is actually ultimately going to become disrespecting. Like, that middle spot's not actually a stable spot. And there's, because it's a higher tone, right? Because it's actually, what about where's your vision? Right? Are you living in this continuum, or are you actually living up here? If you're grounding your relationship with the feminine by means of reverence, right, with the notion of the Virgin, the notion of the Mother of God as having a sensibility, as being part of an architecture that is sacred in itself, then you actually can hold that, and then respect will naturally flow. But if you don't have that, and you're just trying to operate along this continuum of respect and disrespect, it becomes increasingly arbitrary over time, and will devolve to disrespect. Sorry, that was
No, it's really good. Yeah, and that whole that whole the altitude versus an attitude idea there. That the attitude of how you interact with the world. Like, I can't do it without a connection, without that reverent connection. And I'm not, it's not because I'm virtuous, like, I'm not like this virtuous dude. No, it's like, I just don't suffer well. And I don't, and a lot of the suffering that takes place within me, again, not because of any virtue of mine, but a lot of the suffering that takes place is lack of reverence. It's like, it's when it's being okay with, well, like, for example, here, I'll give you a good example. Right before I did my prayer stuff, my dogs were running around the house here, and they ran and bumped the table and knocked over one of the drinks, and I was like so pissed off, dude. And like, and I kind of barked at my dog, and I'm like, son of a bitch. Like, I'm not gonna, how am I gonna have a daughter if I can't even, you know, and like, and like, this is tough. It's tough. And so I know I need to stay connected. I know I need to do these things.
Yeah.
Not because I want to. Like, I didn't even want to become a Christian. It had nothing to do with what I wanted. It had to do with, no, this is yours. Deal with it now.
Yeah, that's a very important. So let's make that distinction. So it's like like a very simple problem that we run into continuously is just this distinction between my judgment, my wisdom, my understanding, and then God's. And I want to. Well, that doesn't matter. That's if you're judging reality on the basis of this, you're categorically in the wrong place every single time. And so you're like, well, I didn't want that. Okay, why? Who cares? Like, that doesn't matter. What you want is not the standard by which reality operates. And now you have a really interesting problem, which is if you attach to that, then you get to sit over there and be sad and mad about the fact that things aren't the way you'd like them to have been. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can say the part of me that likes to suck its thumb and be petulant would like there not to have been 1,000-year flood in my town. I think I would prefer for that to have been. As we were talking about before we recorded, I would like there to be a Halloween. Like, it seems like it would be a nice thing. But what do I have? That's bizarre to think that I have, that it's proper for me to even judge reality that way. Mm-hmm. The way to judge reality is to say, I'm confused, which is not at all uncommon, but what God's doing here. And it's so far above my pay grade that I have to notice the humility necessary of being in a place of, well, he's doing something, and how do I enter into relationship with that? Like, what's here for me? And you notice this continuous shift of basic disposition, right? Disposition number one is this wildly adolescent sensibility that my ability to cultivate a world of my own preference in the fantastical is proper and necessary, versus what does it mean to just be able to respond to the reality that actually is. Mm-hmm. And I think that just is like that, those two just keep going. And every time something happens, you're constantly faced with this bifurcation of, you stub your toe. Do you want to sort of situate yourself in the moment just before you stubbed your toe and just imagine that you can change the past by virtue of being mad at the present? So now magically is unstubbed. Well, guess what? That ain't going to work. Your toe is stubbed. That's it. You're done. You can check and see if it's got harm. Do I need to Band-Aid? Do I need to whatever? Can I move the chair so I don't stub it again? Like, these could do forward actions in relationship with reality. But that other thing is just a bizarre, and I think fundamentally deeply human. Like, that's one of the things that we come preloaded with, is that problem. Yeah, it's funny. One of the things that came to my mind earlier when you were speaking was like, the most dangerous thing in the world is the virtuous man. And here I actually have like the Greek archetypes. As opposed to, say, for example, the Arthurian or the chivalric archetypes. Somebody like Galahad is virtuous, but he knows that his virtue is 100% dependent upon his piety and his humility. And that is actually just the expression of God's grace in him that we can then notice as being virtue. And that's useful to be able to say, okay, this is good, but you don't get that good by focusing on the thing. You get that good by going this way. Whereas somebody like, say, Achilles is an embodiment of a certain quality of virtue in the Greek sensibility, but by virtue of being disconnected from the father, there's a monstrosity to it that is also baked in. And one generation hence, like if you have an actual, like say Solomon, you have an actual wise and virtuous person, the next generation can fall right off the cliff because it doesn't live in this horizontal realm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, there's this saying, this guy Bill Wilson, he's like the co-founder, basically the founder of Alcoholics Anonymous. He has like all these really great writings. One of these sayings he has is that that we in AA are more brothers in our defects than we are in our virtues. And that there's like this, I think I find that to be really true. I mean, this is where we get to identify with each other. We get to share wisdom based on our shortcomings. Yeah, that whole that whole okay. So what was coming to mind for me, and I don't mean to throw anybody under the bus. I shouldn't do that.
No, throw some under the bus. Let's find out who it is. I'm interested. Okay, who are you about to throw under the bus? Is it somebody I know, or is it somebody I don't even know at all?
I don't know. Maybe. So what I've noticed since becoming Christian, and then like my attention being drawn towards these places on YouTube where there's all these units of attention, and you have all these left-right dynamics and things, and then once I became Christian, I started noticing when other people become Christian. You had guys like Shia LaBeouf came out as Christian, which was a fascinating thing, and then you had
this is the He Will Not Divide Us dude, the guy from Transformers.
Yeah, he be like his whole conversion story is really fascinating, and then you had like Hersi Ali, like,
yeah,
and then you had yourself. Yeah, and then you had yourself, and then you had like Russell Brand has come out as Christian. All this has been really fascinating to watch, and like I think to be at such a to have such a position of status, let's say like somebody like Brand, like man, that would just be way too much to carry, I think, for me.
Yeah.
And like, so
that's the beauty of it, right? Because you're not him. You're not him, and he's not you. So his life arc has thrown him into a place where he's able to carry precisely the thing that he's supposed to carry. And the whole point is you couldn't, but that's because you're not him.
Right. And so when you mention Achilles, my mind flashed to Brand when he was especially like what caught my attention, what had me alarmed is the different times I've seen him praying on stage. And that to me is that's scary to me. I don't know, because I think like, man, like I don't know what to say about it. Like just thinking about like especially around anonymity and things. I think there's something around anonymity that is very, very valuable and probably good. And I wonder, I don't know why that came to mind. Why the Achilles character came to mind as it relates to Brand praying on stage.
So a few days ago, and it's been on my mind, somebody, I think his name's Wright, asserted that Brand is actually a grifter. So he's lying and pretending, which would be a really profoundly, insightful grift to say, hey, I think that the Christian conversion thing is a new hip place. And if I get there early, nobody's going to notice that I'm pretending, and I can sort of trade an old currency for a new currency, which is, wow, a pretty sophisticated grift.
Do it. Okay.
And his warning, his admonition was Christians are being played. Okay. So what I noticed was something like maybe three things. One is it could be, there's certainly many, many people that I've noticed in the sort of the history of the Christian world that I've witnessed that seem like they were pretending. And pretending on various degrees. Right? Some were pretending and deceiving themselves. Right? These are kind of like the self-righteous types. Some maybe were in fact straight up actually grifters who were just taking advantage of other people's desire to believe and performing quite effectively. And he's a good performer, so it could be. Mm-hmm. But then the second thing that came up was something like for example, Paul isn't anonymous. We know him. He was selected. He was set aside for a particular piece of work. And there was something about his capabilities that he developed in his pre-conversion state that was part of what God was using him for in his post-conversion state. And so Or maybe there's something about all these things that look dangerous in Russell that are in fact precisely what is needed in this moment in time. And that's kind of the gift that he has to give. So those two sit next to each other. And the third was really interesting, which was something like how can, if the Christian story is true, then it's not actually even really up to Russell. You know, if he is praying and he is living in a particular way, and he just, like you're saying, just doing the rosary. Look, just say thank you when you wake, or please help me when you wake up, and thank you when you go to bed. Why? Don't worry about it. Just do that for a while. You know, if he is sort of, even if in his mind he thinks he's play acting to some extent, but he's actually beginning to participate, then that's the thing that he's going to get grabbed by. I had dinner last night with a gentleman who he told me about his experience, and it was quite clear. It was quite beautiful. He was in a spot. We're talking about the late 60s, early 70s, 72. And he is a vagabond. He's a drug dealer. He's living a very sinful life, evil. In fact, he articulated as evil. Some really good looking girl pulls up and says, hey, he's walking along the road. Like, do you want to ride? And he's like, yeah, let's go. Praying actually specifically said, man, I hope a car comes up with good looking girls you could take so we can go party. She pulls up. He's like, hey, he gets in and she goes, I'm headed to Bible study. He's like, oh no. Oh. And he goes, well, you got any food? Because I haven't eaten in a day. I'm hungry. She goes, yeah, we got food. I'm like, all right, I'll go along. So now in his mind, he's just going to be play acting. He's going to scam these stupid Christians, get their food, and maybe make a move on her, whatever, right? And at a certain point, he finds himself in a context where, like, the person who's leading the Bible study is praying, and she says something like, and they're singing, and she just says to him, like, pray. And he goes, yeah, I can pretend to pray. And so he starts to pretend to pray, and then he goes, and he realizes suddenly something just starts coming out of me that I don't have any conscious control over. And then the next thing I know, this is actually his testimony, the next thing I know, I am in a completely dark place with this bright light that is Jesus standing in front of me, and we're together, and we're just in this space of unbelievable presence. He's like, basically, and I then wake up on the floor, and they say, hey, are you okay? And I go, what happened? How long have I been? You were out for 45 minutes, but we figured you were with Jesus, so we just let you be. And that moment. And the point is, your little mind might think that you're in charge, but if God's got his purposes for you, that's just the way it's going to be. So I think all three of those are relevant. Like, there is definitely a reality of people who take advantage of being able to simulate and produce minor idols that are very close and pull people away from what is true. It's also the case that God uses people in a very particular way. Like, he moves their lives in a particular way to put them to proper purpose. And then it's also the case that if that second is true, what you think, even if you think you're in the first bucket, you may in fact not. You may be finding yourself going the wrong way. So for me, that just says, okay, well then just, pray for Russell. And if God has anything that he wants for me to do vis-a-vis him, he'll, have that, we call it a garbage truck pull up with a big sign, the picture of Russell. Yeah. Call him now. Like, okay.
Yeah, that's funny. No, like, that's why I was kind of reluctant to bring it up, because I didn't want to. I didn't want to be like, like, oh, Russell Brand, like, not like that, because like I'm in a fellowship of people who like find God in all sorts of bizarre ways. My wife sponsored a lady who didn't even know that Easter had anything to do with Jesus, and her route into Christ was through crystals first. And then from crystals, she was watching who's that guy, that real famous dude on television? I can't remember his name. The Texas guy with the real nice hair and real big ass church. Yeah. Everybody knows who I'm talking about. I can't remember.
Osteen?
Yeah. Osteen. Yeah. So she went from like crystals to watching Osteen
Which is
her
kind of like, that makes sense, right? Those are pretty adjacent to each other.
Yeah, and then from there, now she's a member of her church, and she's helping to, she's a member of a Christian church, and they put her on the board because that's what you do. You always get the new person involved somehow, and so her job now is to try and figure out where to give monies for the church, from the church, to people who need it in the community. And so, like, I wanted to be careful on bringing up the brand name, because I also believe that I don't think he's grifting. I don't. I think he's very genuine. I think he's a genuine seeker. And I bring up the topic because I also want to model an honesty that I think a lot of people have, which is, what is going on with this? People are always asking this, what's happening? And this is kind of like, I think, where the church has been able to hold itself together, and where it's gotten itself in trouble in the past. And so how do we move forward when we have, guys that are called to carry a very, very large and awkward cross, like praying on the stage with Jordan Peterson or Tucker Carlson? I mean, praying, like, that's a huge, ridiculous cross that I hope I'm never placed in. Have to carry that, because nobody wants this guy doing that.
Only if you're wearing that lobster hat.
Right, exactly. So, and what I mean, yeah, exactly. I'm a guy who's claiming to be a Christian, who is a one-time homeless alcoholic, who says now he's a Christian, and he's wearing this stupid lobster face on YouTube. Like, I could be grifting too, like, it's crazy. It's crazy, all this stuff. So I guess,
well, we can even be more precise, which is that I think this is a perfectly proper understanding of psychology. You probably are grifting to some small extent, right? Part of your mind is constantly doing that kind of like narrow, how do I get the most out of this kind of grabby thing? Right? That's just part of who we are. It's built into us, right? It's just like this thing is part of our psychology. This is sort of the lower nature. The lower nature is there, and you can't avoid it. There's no point in trying to avoid it. The point is actually just to keep trying to work your way up. Like, this is like that narrative you're talking about, the lady in the crystals. Like, it's less about where you are than the directionality of how you're moving. And if you're moving from less to more, even if more is relatively less than, say, what somebody else might think, well, but that doesn't matter. The point is, on your vector, you're moving, and by the way, there's these weird loops where, geez, I'm a homeless alcoholic. It seems like I'm definitely moving the wrong way. And in some sense, yeah, you're definitely moving the wrong way. And in another sense, there's something about it, which when it finally lands, it will have been part of the way, which is moving you towards the Father. And that's the only way, right? That's the direction. The direction is towards the Father, and everything else is not real, but the direction is what matters, right? The followers of the way, right? That's the earlier. Before you start talking about Christians, there's followers of the way. And what that means is, it's not about, it's such a beautiful, like, radically deep and perfectly superficial. It's about the journey, man. It's not the destination. And it's not about, okay, now I'm a trad calf, so I win. Like, I got to home base and I'm done. It's like, no, it's the vector. Like, every second, are you moving more in the path of Christ? And no point you're at is ultimately better than anybody else's particular point. And it's only relevant to the movement that you're going through.
Yeah. And I think about those desert fathers. Those guys were wild. I mean, I just think, like, and I don't know a lot about them, but I really like, what my understanding is, something like they had this deep, almost insatiable thirst to be connected to the Father, and they were willing to destroy their lives to seek Him.
Yeah, to negate anything that is humans, we would identify as being alive.
Yeah, and they did that, and then shared their experience so that we don't have to, I think. And like,
I would get rid of the last part. I would just say, and then share their experience, because that's what the Father had them do.
Yeah.
Well, it may be that we have to. We don't. That wasn't the point. It wasn't purposeful. It was, look, I am utterly surrendered to the Father, and it appears to be the case that I should be sharing this. Okay.
Yes. Well, right. Yeah, I suppose the way that I phrase it's a little, and it's hard to say it, because, like, yeah, maybe 1,000-year flood hits you and you're called to wander the desert. I don't know. Like, so,
Right.
yeah, so, okay, so early on, in this conversation, you mentioned that the church will have to probably contend with what it is that we're doing here. And like, so how do we do this? I mean, like, is it what we're doing? Is what you and I are doing currently right now? Like, we belong to different traditions. We're in completely different places on the planet. We have wildly different ways of seeing and understanding the world, and yet there's some similar threads that we share. And I think so. My association with this little corner of the internet, I find I wouldn't spend any time with this if it wasn't if I didn't believe that there was something truly real and beautiful and important that God is doing with this internet medium. And
Mm.
it's a strange thing to do because, like, there are all these different cross threads of thinkers who some aren't even Christian, some are even Islamic or Jewish or atheist or whatever. It's like, but yet we are talking and having we're trying to work towards something together. And is that what
So,
you? Yeah.
so okay, here's the only thing that I can share with the feeling of like, yeah, this feels close in the direction of true. First, from a point of view of both humility and like the demonstrability, pattern recognition, that the circumstances we find ourselves in are novel enough that we should be deeply wary of endeavoring to use approaches, models, habits, even faculties that have been part of the past, let's say, couple hundred years, as the way of endeavoring to navigate what's happening. Quite specifically, I can say that and this is a very nuanced and very difficult thing to grasp, but the TV mind, which is narrative mind, and a mind that really does believe that disassociating from reality, crafting a narrative, and then endeavoring to pretend that narrative is real, is the proper way of living. And it's a very powerful way. That what I just said is an extremely strong descriptor of the nature of most of how people in the West in particular try to live these days.
Mm-hmm.
Just look at how often the argument is about which narrative gets to describe what just happened, and about maintaining the integrity of the narrative as opposed to simply being in relationship with reality. And there's a lot of reasons for that, because another way of describing it, and I've used this language in the past, is this category called paradigmatic mind. And the reason why we have surrendered ourselves to paradigmatic mind is that paradigmatic mind gives us something that suffices to be agency. It gives us processes and tools and techniques that we can kind of pull off the shelf and apply when we face particular problems. And this is modernity is ultimately governed by paradigmatic mind, and paradigmatic mind is not the right approach to the circumstances we find ourselves in. So if you make that hypothesis, right, that whole thing I just said, that's the hypothesis, then they say, okay, well, how do you respond then to a context where the degree of novelty is high enough that you have to be going deeper in the stack? In the Christian sense, this now becomes things like discernment. We begin to notice that if I can't rely on an existing tool to pattern match and give me a way of judging what's happening and then navigating that strategically to get to a desired goal, well, what can I do? Well, what I can do is I can try to be humble and curious and confused and try to discern what it is that God is doing in this context. Like, that's a completely different way of thinking about it. It's not really at all governed by my own mental model or my way of, it's actually, I happen to have a set of faculties for being able to come into relationship with the divine. And the divine is present, and the divine is expressing himself in the world. And of course, he can express himself in this medium. Obviously, that's not even it would be absurd to think otherwise. Mm-hmm. And so the challenge is, how do I hone in myself this set of faculties that are governed by my ability to actually be able to respond to what the divine is doing in this world. So this is that back to that point. When Chad reaches out to me, what do? I pray on it. I can't say I'm very good at it. I can't say that I have a sense of like I can like, surf the sort of the sacred internet with absolute beauty, but I can say that I'm pretty sure that's the right approach, and to get really better at it and be better and better and better at noticing what is it the Spirit calling for in this moment, and what is the kind of the new set of liturgies that are ultimately able to ground and simplify so that we're able to have things that we can remember to do. Wake up, say please, go to sleep, say thank you. That's liturgy, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
How do we, what are the new set of liturgies that begin to be discerned first, and then they begin to show up in something like our own relationship at the level of the embodied church in the hyperspace, hyperchurch. And then, but of course, always the Spirit, right? And always working with the Spirit. And so I think that's actually the way, like that's the methodology, that's the process. And that's the embodiment of the logos in the hyperspace environment. There's a thing going on here, which is categorically, you remember that term hyper conversation that Vervaeke and I used a while, like for maybe 2 or 3 years?
I think so. It's related to like a hyper object, but it's like maybe more like the conversation that's an ongoing thread through. Is that what that is?
Yeah. So it sits next to hyper object, as you say, but in the category of conversation. The point is something like this. You're recording this, which means that you're going to then be putting it on the internet, which means that you and I have no idea who's going to see this. It's impossible in principle for us to know. We can maybe run some heuristics and assume that people who follow Chad will have a higher probability than others, but right, we have no idea. And roll that out over time, right? It might be that somebody 1,000 years from now happens to see this, or that an AI like a year from now ingests this and it becomes part of the AI's internal operating model of reality. And so the point is that the hyper conversation is an arbitrarily high dimensional field of consciousness, of minds in communication with each other, that is strictly outside of our capacity to model or plan for. And that's why hyperobject is a complex set of interlocking phenomena in reality that is strictly outside of our capacity to understand and therefore to cybernetically control and manage. Hyper conversation is the same kind of thing. Okay, well, how do you then operate in the context of something where you can't? I don't know. I can't like try to think like, what's my key message? Who's the audience that I want to talk to? Right? How do I? You can't. It's impossible because I have no idea who's even going to be on the other side of it, if anyone. Well, what do you do? Well, the answer is endeavor to the best that you possibly can to allow the transcendent to express itself through you as an instrumentality. That's it. Because what can navigate a hyper conversation? God. Right? God can navigate a hyper conversation. The actual transcendent, the actual divine can navigate a hyper conversation. And then as we allow ourselves to be increasingly well-tuned instrumentalities, a harmonic begins to emerge in all of the elements of that become increasingly able to come into something like a well-orchestrated instrumentality. Right? So when you and I come into what I used to call, say, something like coherence, a particular quality of coherence, our union becomes a new instrumentality that contains something like a synergistic multiplier of the sum of our parts. And so my instrumentality and your instrumentality come together, but when they come into harmony, something new, a third emerges, which is actually larger than the sum. And as more and more and more enter individually and collectively, the quality of the sacred to express itself through us into the world increases. By the way, it increases at a geometric rate. And if you understand the implications of what I just said, it is mind-blowingly profound.
Yeah, it makes me think of when you bring up the word presence. It makes me think of when it's humming, when all that is humming and just the right in these unpredictable ways, that's the presence, which is very powerful. I wish I could. Well, I want to, since the AIs in 1,000 years are going to potentially be listening to this, I do want to share this. I was struck to share this poem with you that I just wrote a couple days ago. And
It's called, well, here we are again. And this is the poem. October 15th, 2024. Today, I asked Joe while fighting with this Tubdex lightweight styrofoam substrate, who are you voting for? Hesitantly, he responds while installing the backsplash of this Jack and Jill vanity in the master bath of this quaint, borderline suburban profanity. I don't have much of a choice, do I? Sun beating through this window, sweat on my brow. Autumn returns again, not quite summer, just cool enough for Jill to kick on the furnace. How do you mean? I asked curiously. Well, I'm not voting for Trump. He only thinks of himself. He won't cross the aisle. So I'm left with not much. Not quite winter either, an abundance of facts and piles of reason. A lack of communication or point of view has Jill at odds with the help, while her comforts come into being. Oh well, what words could I utter to show Joe the error of his point of view? Do I even know mine? I can't even remember October 15th of 2020. And they say hindsight is 2020. And facts and logic point out life today is infinitely better than 4 years ago to the day. So who's right when reason stands plainly in full with half sight? And that's my ridiculous little poem about discernment is so strange. Like, because I wanted to, like the temptation to tell Joe is so stupid. When I look at the facts of my life, it's like, yeah, the last 4 years, there's an aspect of them that's undesirable, right? But then I think, yeah, but it's infinitely better than it was 4 years ago for me. Like it's
Yeah.
and
The discernment piece, as you say, discernment is so strange. It's I found myself recently because in our town now, maybe it's beginning to change like in the past 2 days, but most people that I know were eating in like large communal settings because we didn't have water. So, and for a while we didn't have power. So people were just sort of gathering, which meant you were now congregating with people that maybe you never met before. And a gentleman sat next to me who, as I discovered later, he's no longer homeless, but he had lived a meaningful amount of time as homeless. And we started having a conversation. And we've now had a couple of conversations. And one of the things that goes through my mind as he's talking, mostly him talking, is, okay, from the point of view of my ability to think as a person, I have absolutely no idea what to say to this gentleman. It's actually, I can notice that nothing that I particularly know or experience, I think, is relevant to his life. Like I don't have any pithy wisdom to give him as a human. So there's really just two things available. One is I can listen. I can literally just listen. If that's what is called for, then that's great. And I can also listen, capital L, and notice if there's something that is not mine, but actually is in fact, once again, God's to give, with really serious degrees of concern about humility on that. Like be very careful, wildly careful about imagining that you're saying something in God's behalf that is actually your own, whatever you think is great, your own virtue, using our previous frame. So yeah, this discernment thing is challenging. And can I tell you a little story, just a brief one?
Yeah.
So here's another one that's wild that's come up. A friend of mine, somebody who I worked with 20 years ago, contacted me before the hurricane, said that he, who usually lives in Italy, was going to be in this neck of the woods, and wouldn't it be fun to hang out? I said, yeah, it'd be awesome. Let's hang out. And then after the hurricane, but after I had begun to have some level of internet connectivity, he said, well, that obviously our previous plans got disrupted, but I'd still love to come out and see you. And he said, let me send you a photograph of what I'm doing right now, so you're not confused. And as it turns out, he became a flavor of a monk, sort of a branch of a Benedictine order, or Benedictite. So they're importing some of the Benedictine methodologies, but they've got their own shtick. And I noticed in sitting with, and he came and we visited. He's wearing like the whole get up, and discernment, like that. How much time and effort and work the monks put into this question of discernment. Like it's something like 50 or 100 times more than I do, in putting so much weight on how to discern properly and keeping moving at that pace. A particular moment before he actually moved into the order, into the monastic, was, a particular nun said, stop even thinking about this. Take it completely off your mind. Go get a regular job for the next 2 solid years. Because God is doing work on your heart. And right now you're not even in a position where you can discern properly. Okay. That's a pretty significant notion, that this is not you can't just jump into it. You can't snap your fingers and discern what happens. It's more like, no, this is a profoundly nuanced, subtle, and mysterious faculty that is load bearing. Like it can actually carry the weight of the most monumental decisions, but is wildly non-trivial in terms of how you cultivate the capacity to do it properly and then to be able to rely on it.
That's very powerful. I was just struck by when Ann and I were trying to have. So we just celebrated our 4-year anniversary on Thursday, and I found out we found it in June that we were going to have our child. Well, we had been trying for like 3 years, and with to no avail. And thinking about God's timing, and let's say maybe even God's discernment, like or God's knowledge that I won't have the ability to discern with as much, like richness as I should. It's like, no, you're not ready. You're not ready for 3 years. You're not ready. And to the point where I came when I was younger, for much of my adult life and even into my early my teens, I always said I would never have kids. Why would I bring children into this world? And then I saw my brother have children, and I thought, man, I think I said a cursed prayer or something. Like I missed out on this incredible thing with children. And then when we tried to have kids, it wasn't happening. And I was thinking for I just resigned to, well, I guess it's not going to happen. And then on my birthday, and took the test and found out that we were having a child, and it was like, wow. Like, and then all sorts of stuff that I couldn't imagine started to, like the things I thought I would be concerned about, like being a fool or not being a good parent, all those things hadn't even occurred to me yet. The only thing that had occurred to me for like the next 4 months now, or whatever, however long it's been, is Anne's health and the baby's health. That's all I can think about. And I couldn't have predicted that would be the thing that I would be concerned about. And so as it relates to discernment and God's timing and just being a person, it's like it's so hard to predict, probably impossible to predict how things will play out and unfold. And now I'm 41 and I'm going to be a father, and it's like I'm going to be a father, and it's going to be a whole new life that I can't even begin to imagine, and I'm going to be one of these old guys who's a father.
And that hurts, man.
No, I know, but I mean, like, it's like, but you're actually,
I'm an old guy who's a father. I get it. Is my daughter like crawls on my lap and she's like, "Are you a grandpa?" I'm like, oh, I am, yeah. You're my daughter, but
I mean, like, and you're in relatively good shape. I'm like 300 pounds. I have to like,
you got to work on that. You cannot be an old dad and be in bad shape. Sorry, man. There's no.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Got to get fit.
Yeah, dude. Yeah, I mean, I quit smoking. That's a miracle, because like I thought that was never gonna happen. I love smoking, and nope, time to not smoke.
None.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
well, blessings. All right, blessings on you, blessings on your wife, blessings on your child. It is a truly wonderful thing. It is the blessing. Like the greatest gift that God gives is children and grandchildren, and it will deepen your relationship with yourself, with your soul, with reality, with, by the way, humility and frustration and your acknowledgement of how terrible you are. That's inevitable. Like, it's just not, you're not going to get around it. But it is an extraordinary gift. And so my heart is sort of quite joyful to hear this news.
Thank you, Jordan. Well, thank you for spending time with me this morning. I really appreciate you, and I appreciate you sharing your walk with us. And I'm looking forward to hearing more of your story as you go along. And so I got to tell you, man, like some of the stuff that I've heard you talk about in the conversation partners that you've had, conversation you had with DC Schindler was mind blowing to me. I thought it was such a rich conversation that you had. All these guys, it's fascinating. It's so cool, and I'm honored to be able to have some little part of this with you, and I hope that your Halloween goes well. It could be one of the greatest you ever had. Who knows?
That's right. That's right.
And but I should probably get going because I have an AA meeting to hit up. So
all right, we'll go. It's good talking to you, brother.
Thank you, Jordan. Have a good one. Bye, everybody. End recording.